Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Katherine Anne Porter channel. I have a special treat today for Porter fans because I have a very special guest that I'm sure many of you know. She is she was the curator of literary manuscripts for the University of Maryland Libraries. And of course, she's a Porter scholar. And she's also on the executive committee of the Katherine Anne Porter Society. It's Dr. Ruth M. Alvarez, also known as Beth Alvarez. How are you?
I'm great.
Great, great. I'm so glad you agreed to do this and talk with me a little bit on my channel. And I interviewed Darlene, as you know, Darlene Unruh a few months ago for this channel, and I covered a wide variety of topics with her. With you, I just wanted to narrow it down a bit and just talk about Porter's short story, "Flowering Judas." So we'll focus on that, and then we'll go from there. Speaking of Darlene, when I interviewed her, she told me that Flowering Judas was the first story of Porter's that she ever read. And she said at the time that she had difficulty understanding it, that there were depths to it that were sort of beyond her reach. I felt the same way when I read it the first time, too. I also gave this story to my mother to read a few years back. She's always very definite. She always thinks she knows exactly what a story is about, and she'll tell me this is her interpretation. But when she read it, she was like, what the hell is this? So why do you think the story is so difficult, maybe at first, for some readers to grasp, and what makes it possibly Porter's deepest short story?
Well, I think that for me, there are two reasons. One is the historical background that it draws from. It is basically the story takes place at a particular time and place that where Porter herself was in the spring of 1921. And the political situation, the social situation, her own personal situation, and the people that she knew. It was a time of plotting against that she knew of, plotting against the government, Obregon's government, Mexican government, and also there were demonstrations of socialists. So it was a time of great upheaval, actually in Mexico, the country, but also in Mexico City this particular time. So that I think if you just come to it completely cold, you may have a sense that it is a particular time and place, but if you don't understand, or have any kind of an idea about that background, it gives you to me, it has a feeling of claustrophobia.
Sure.
And I think the second reason why I think it's more difficult to understand is I feel it's a much more self-conscious literary story than the ones that preceded it. I mean, she was starting to get there, I think, in The Jilting of Granny Weatherall, which was the story that was published before Flowering Judas, right before it. But this particular time in her life, she was living in New York and had, literary friends, and they would spend a lot of time talking about literary things and read literary works. So it's clear, and one of your other questions calls this into we'll call into, bring this up as a subject or make it very, very clear. But I think she was drawing on her knowledge of literature, contemporary literature as well.
I see. All right. Well, it definitely answers that. I think maybe also people seem to understand it until they get to that last paragraph where Laura has her dream or her nightmare,
Yeah.
dream slash nightmare. And that sort of takes it to a whole other level. I think that's what throws a lot of people off as well. At least it threw me off the first time I read
Uh-huh.
it. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, the
Okay.
dream
Okay.
sequence.
Yeah.
So why do you think Porter chose this story to be the title story of her first collection? Her first collection is called Flowering Judas and Other Stories. Did she
No,
think it was,
actually, her first collection was called Flowering Judas.
that's right. And then
Not
it
called
came
Flowering
out,
Judas and Other Stories. That's
right.
the 1935 edition. The 1930 edition is just called Flowering Judas.
Right, right. So why do you think did you think this was the best of her stories? Did you think the story had some special significance or some like maybe modern relevance that perhaps her other stories didn't have?
Well, actually, she wrote to Joseph. I'm reading from, I actually found a quote. She wrote to Josephine Herbst on the 1st of April, 1930. Quote, It is by far the best I ever did, and it's in the mood and style of the novel. So yes, I think she thought it was, at that point in time, her very best work. And as I said before, I think it's very self-consciously literary.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, I think that's the reason why she would have chosen it for the title of the volume.
Okay.
She was intending, I mean, and I'm sure you know this, I don't know whether the people who follow the channel know this, but she intended to write a novel of Mexico. And they were going to be basically stories based around fictional characters who were based on real people in Mexico. So this is, as she says, in the mood and style of the novel.
Well, that leads me perfectly to my next question, which is what was the inspiration for the story, and are the characters in the story based on people she knew during her time in Mexico?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the story is based on her own looking back at this particular period in during her first long-term stay in Mexico. She went back to Mexico she went to Mexico for the first time in November 1920, and she left about, we believe, late August 1921. And this particular story is set very particularly before demonstrations that were taking place in Morelia, because it's mentioned in the story, in May of 1921. So we know that at some time the setting is actually, early, May or probably April. And it is interesting too, because it's kind of in the period of Easter, which draws on, the kinds of things that we're talking about. So now I lost my train of thought. So the inspiration. Okay, so the inspiration was basically this particular period in Mexico and the people, et cetera, that she knew. So she did herself say that one of the models for Laura in the story is her friend Mary Doherty. And Mary Doherty clearly is, if you look at the description of the character in it, it is indeed almost looks like and exactly like a picture of Mary Doherty that was taken in the 20s, where she wears, a dark dress with a white collar with lace around it. And so, yes, Mary was her friend. And the other thing is, in Porter's papers, there is a short note where she describes walking by Mary's window and seeing Samuel Udico, who was one of the other people who was referenced or fictionalized in the story, playing the guitar and singing to Mary. So that was the visual thing that gave her, I guess, the starting point for going forward. But it's very clear. I mean, I think anybody who knows anything about Katherine Anne Porter, that the main avatar or the main model for Laura and Flower and Judas is Katherine Anne Porter herself. She is the one who had the relationships. I mean, and Mary did too, but she's the one who went into the jails. Mary said that she never visited anybody in jails until she visited Tina Modotti, much later in the 30s. Well, I guess it was like late 29, 30. I'm trying to remember when Modotti left Mexico, but that's not relevant to this story, to what we're talking about. But so that clearly Porter's experiences in Mexico in that particular time, when she was sort of involved with politicians and all of that, and other artistic figures as well. But that she's one of the models for it. And of course, Udico is Bragioni is based on Udico, but not so much Udico. It's really much more Samuel Moronis. Both Udico and Moronis had started out as labor leaders. They were very involved in a major Mexican labor union, but they then became supporters of Obregon, and through Obregon, they were appointed positions in the government. So they were also political figures and supported Obregon. Eventually, I mean, by the time Porter wrote the story, Udico was dead and Moronis had been basically, I'm trying to think what's the word I want to use. He had been discredited, although he really wasn't involved at all in the assassination of Obregon in 1928. Obregon ran again for president in 28, and then was actually assassinated before he took office. So that created a big problem there too. So whether or not all of that, because she knew, of course, she had friends in Mexico. She knew what was happening between the time that she first went to Mexico and when she went back again in 1930. And the story, of course, was written in the end of 1929. So the other two characters that are very obvious in the story are the Polish agitator and Romanian agitator, and they are drawn from people that she knew. Roberto Haberman was someone that actually, I believe she had actually known him in New York, but he had gone to Mexico to do labor organizing and had then gotten involved with the government and supported Obregon. And the other one was J.H. Rettinger, who also, he was actually a European, but had come to Mexico and had gotten involved with people. He actually wrote a biography of Moronis. I don't know if you know that.
No.
Yeah. So I think that's do you have any, like follow-up questions? I mean, there are allusions to other people in it, but those are the main ones, I think. I don't think have I missed anybody else?
Well, I was thinking of I believe there are two. I read this story last night to kind of refresh my memory. It's been a while since I read it. I think there are two. Laura has two men that are sort of wooing her in the story, but Laura remains sort of celibate, right, throughout the story. She doesn't. There's no, as Bragioni says, there's no man in the revolution. Like, why are you in a revolution if there's no man that you don't love? And of course, he says something like that, and there's no man that she loves. There's no man that she's involved with. But I know Porter, I believe this is right. When she was in Mexico, she did have several affairs. Is that correct?
Well, I do believe from what I've read. I don't know that it's necessarily very obvious. Well, I mean, it is kind of obvious in some of her writings that she and Rettinger did carry on an affair, but it was not the other characters. Those two characters, actually, I do believe that I was reading in Tom Walsh's book. I mean, are you familiar with his book, Katherine Anne Porter in Mexico?
Yes.
Yeah. I think he said that the episode where Laura spurs her horse to get away from the from the handsome Zapatista captain, that was based on something that happened to Mary Doherty. That she had put off the advances of someone whose name it was given. I don't know that I could actually pronounce it, so I won't even try. But I guess the idea of the guy who is the other one who is the suitor of I mean, I don't know if he's really so much a suitor as basically lovesick for Laura.
Yes.
I mean, he is one of the organizers of the type of typographers union. And of course, they were all involved with the union organizers and people that they knew who were in the union. I don't think, again, that was something that actually happened. I mean, she just used that character. I mean, I find that scene in the patio where he is serenading her, and the way Porter describes that is just so beautiful. And of course, it's a way of integrating or introducing the Judas tree.
Yes, that's right. That's the first. And because Porter, I think once herself said that so much of her writing was reporting, and she was a reporter. So it's sort of, I think a lot of people are interested because she said that, and because and she wrote, of course, she wrote a lot of nonfiction too. That there must be some basis in all of her. There must be something in her stories that's based on something that happened to her or something in real life. So I think it kind of begs that question. A lot of people seem to be interested in what really happened that caused her to write all of her short stories. It seems like there are a lot of things in the Mexican stories that she either did experience or she witnessed, and she's reporting. But as she said, she does something to the reporting, and then it becomes fiction.
Absolutely.
So it's hard to know what's fiction and what's not, but it seems to start out with something that really happened. So let's go to the next question I have, and this is going to be a much deeper deeper question. Porter, I believe this is true. She borrowed the symbolism of the story from a T.S. Eliot poem. I think she said, correct me if I'm wrong, in a letter that she wrote, I think rather late in her life, she said it was the only time she consciously borrowed a symbol from another writer. I think I have that right. And so can you explain what caused her to borrow this symbol? What about the symbol that you think was relevant to what she was trying to say? And what was the Eliot poem? And maybe you can tell us a little bit about the Eliot poem, what that's about, and how does it how is it relevant to the point she's trying to make in Flowering Judas?
Well, I can read to you from her letter to R.P. Blackmer,
Okay.
which was written on November 29th, 1929. Are you familiar with this letter?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. So although she said when she mailed off Flowering Judas that it was mailed to Lincoln Kirstein, no, in fact, it was mailed to R.P. Blackmer at Hound and Horn. So she says, Matthew Josephson suggested that I send you a short story, believing that you might be interested in the kind of thing I do. This is one of a half dozen, somewhat in the same, this story is one of a half dozen, somewhat in the same vein, with Mexico as the background, which I propose to finish this winter. This is the first I have completed. The title I owe to a passage in T.S. Eliot's Gerontion. And then she quotes, in depraved May, dogwood and chestnut, flowering Judas, to be eaten, to be divided, to be drunk among whispers. And I am wondering if I should have set this quotation below the title. But if you don't like the story, I imagine this will not be important. So when he replied, he said, it may take away from your story. It's going to seem like it's derivative if we put this in. So he did not recommend doing it. And as we all know, not in the serial publication of it in 1930, nor in any subsequent publication did the quote appear. So she says directly that I took the title from this poem. So we know that for sure. And two, what I think is she also took that scene or created her scene of the basically, I guess you would say like a scene of a communion at the end of the story that you had referred to with Eugenia, the skeleton Eugenia, offering her flowers from the Judas tree. Because in the story, of course, those are being, it's not just flowering Judas flowers, but flowers of dogwood and chestnut that are offered to various people who are named in Gerontion, T.S. Eliot's poem. So, I guess my understanding of Gerontion, and I don't know that I understand it all that well, Alan, I do think that it kind of the same atmosphere as Flowering Judas is in Gerontion. I have read that people say that it's it ends with it's a dramatic monologue at the end. The last two lines are tenants of the house, thoughts of a dry brain in a dry season. And of course, the person speaking is an old man. But what I have read is it basically is this man's feelings, expressions, reaction to the period after World War I, when basically, a lot of people felt as if civilization was at its end, that things were never going to be the same again, all of that. And it seems to me that in Flowering Judas, you have kind of the same situation, that debased feeling of claustrophobia even comes across in Flowering Judas. I don't know. Is that clear, not clear? I don't know.
Well, no, it's great. It's great. And I was just thinking because I guess it's pretty obvious that the Judas tree stands for betrayal,
Yes.
betrayal of some sort, maybe self-betrayal, betrayal of principles, betrayal of a lot of things. And I know in that last paragraph when Laura has the nightmare, she's eating the Judas blossoms, but she's actually eating Eugenio's body and blood. Is
Yes.
that right? Yeah. And then as Christ's body and blood is eaten like in the Eucharist,
Absolutely.
bread and wine. But
Yes.
this is kind of an inversion, but she's eating the Judas blossoms. And it's mentioned also in the Gerontion poem that the Judas, I believe it says Judas blossoms are eaten and divided.
Yes.
Or eaten and drunk and divided among whispers. Is that right?
Yeah, here we go.
So so it's
drunk
like
among whispers. She cuts it off by Mr. Silvero with caressing hands at Limoges, who walked all night in the next room. By Hawagawa, bowing among the titians. By Madame de Tornquist in the dark room, shifting candles. So, I mean, it's being offered to individual people. it is interesting. But yeah, I guess we have stepped around the whole idea of a Judas, who Judas was, the betrayer of Christ. And of course, the legend is, I don't think it was actually true, that he hanged himself
Yes.
from the tree that got the name of Flowering Judas. So all of that, and as you say, betrayal. And actually, Darlene and I were talking just the other day, and she said, Eudora Welty once said that the theme in all of Katherine Anne Porter's works is betrayal.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's definitely in this work, and I think I would agree. If you start to think about one after the other, yes, that is indeed true.
Okay. And I believe I got this right too. Porter said, I think in one of her letters, the story was centered around the theme of, and so many of her stories are around the theme of self-delusion
Yeah.
as well. And I believe she said that Laura, I believe maybe it was the girl that Laura was based on too. She said that she wasn't taking care of herself. She wouldn't be able to face what she had done. So I guess explain how the character of Laura illustrates this, if you can, and illustrates the theme of self-delusion. And what is she saying? She wakes up from her nightmare and she screams no at the very end of the story. Well, she says no throughout the story to a
Yeah.
lot of things. So
She's
what is,
saying no,
go ahead.
no to everything. I mean,
Yeah.
it is kind of interesting. She says no to love.
Mm-hmm.
She says no essentially to the revolution because she's
Yes.
become very disillusioned with it. She basically, Laura, even though she goes into a church, she basically cannot, she's basically rejected her religion. She's
Mm-hmm.
no, she can't, she prays, but she's not, she doesn't feel like it's effective. She clearly says no to either suicide or death at the end of the story. She's not, she is, I mean, I take it as she is not going to do what Eugenio had done. She's going to remain alive. And I think also she said she is denying or, saying no to the political situation that she's observed. I mean, she realizes that, I mean, the background story basically is that she copied some letters that she saw that her friend again, to go into all the background of who William Niven is, I don't think that's necessary.
Mm-hmm.
But she found letters that basically revealed a plot against Overgon to overthrow the government. And she basically took it somewhere so that it ultimately ended up in 5 people dying. So she actually really literally betrayed people. And I do believe probably felt some guilt or, about that. But she betrayed her own principles. I mean, the character in the story, admits that, she is with this corrupt character, Bragioni, but he's made it possible for her to have her comfortable situation and her comfortable salary.
Mm-hmm.
So she had whatever. I mean, it says in the story that she came to Mexico uninvited, but she had the idea of some idealism that she was going to do something there. And basically she's betrayed it all. So anyway, I don't know. Did I address the question? It seems like I did.
Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just a very complex story. There's so much to unpack. There's so much to talk about. And maybe she's also, or maybe you alluded that she's also saying no to, well, she won't admit that she is partly responsible for Eugenio's death. Is that
Oh
what
my
you said?
God, she's definitely responsible
Yeah.
for Eugenius' death because until I reread this story recently, I didn't remember that she actually says to Bragioni, he took these. I mean, I don't remember exactly what she says, but it's clear that she knew that he took the pills that she
Mm-hmm.
had given him, and he was starting to pass out or
Mm-hmm.
become unconscious or whatever. And she didn't do anything about it. She could have called the doctor. She could have done something. And so she basically walked away and let him die. I mean, we don't know for sure that he died, but we have to assume that. And then Bragioni very, callously says, well, he's, we don't need him. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter. It's unimportant. So, yes.
And so would you say Eugenio was a true martyr in that sense, and maybe one of the good guys, maybe, and maybe even kind of a Christ-like figure because of because of the illusions at the end, or not.
Yeah, I don't know if I would say that. I mean, we know
Yeah,
so little about him. Yes, I mean, for the reasons that you've just stated,
yeah,
perhaps so. But I mean, I don't know that he's taking his life because he's bored.
mm,
I mean, what does that say about the guy?
yeah, yeah,
I mean, if he was really devoted to the revolution or to the politics to, Obregon or whoever, or if he was opposed Obregon and that's the reason why he's in jail, then why is he going to kill himself because he's bored? If you were really engaged in something, wouldn't you
yeah.
want to stay
It's
alive?
just at the end when he says, "This is my body and my blood."
Oh
And of
yeah,
course, you think of Christ, but then also it's sort of inverted in a way because she's eating the Judas flower. She's not eating bread and wine.
right.
So it depends on how you look at Eugenio. That's where the whole thing about betrayal comes in. So this is why I think it's a little confusing. I've always wondered how exactly to view Eugenio. um, Maybe there's the way that I'd like to view him, and then the way that the story sort of implies, and at the end it sort of leaves it open. As you said, well, I guess we just don't know too much. We don't know that much about him. But he seems to take on this symbolism or greater significance at the end in Laura's dream. So
Yes.
that's why you start thinking, well, maybe there's more to him than, but yeah, okay. Well, that goes back. It's that last paragraph that really sort of, I guess, contains the major symbolism of the story and kind of becomes the story at the end. There's so many different interpretations, but well, this leads me to my last
Oh,
question
okay. Yeah,
too.
I was just going to look at
Because
it.
yeah, this story has been and actually I think it's interesting you talked about the reference to Eliot not being included in her collection, but I think I've seen it in some anthologies. They will they'll put an asterisk like next to the title or a footnote, and down the bottom it will reference
Yeah,
Eliot's poem.
might and maybe in a note or something, but
Yeah.
it was not. Uh, I do not have a copy of. I do not personally own a copy of Flowering Judas, the first edition.
Uh-huh.
None of the others. I have all of the others.
Hmm.
It is not an epigraph in any of the, and not in the original story because I have a copy of the Hound and Horn thing, which is right
Sure.
there, and you can see uh, it's not there.
I just remember seeing in a couple of college textbooks, and maybe they
Yeah.
included it to help people understand the story. I
Yeah.
don't know. I just remember seeing
Well, to
it.
put it in the context of what it is, because,
Yeah.
as I said, I feel as if this story is one that is very, in many ways, is self-consciously literary as opposed to, because it really it is like in some ways Gerontian. It
Yes.
leaves a lot of questions. I mean, it is a modernist kind of fiction, which I don't find her later short stories to be that much.
Hmm.
I mean, I don't know if you disagree with that or not, but I find the old order stories, much, they move me in a great deal. And I guess I should say that always my favorite amongst her work is Old Mortality.
Yes. Yes.
That story just really speaks to me.
Hmm.
They don't have the same kind of a feel that this story does. I mean, it's
Hmm.
really quite unique in some ways. So anyway,
And I think that's why the story has been so anthologized because there is so much to unpack and so much to talk about. And I think these college textbooks and college classes, they love symbols. Anything that has symbols, you can have endless discussions about. So maybe why Flowering Judas is still part of this day in a lot of anthologies and particularly college textbooks.
yeah,
Um,
and different people see different things in it.
Well, I
Basically,
have to be honest, and maybe some Porter fans won't like it I'm about to say, but when I read it last night, because I'm much older now, as you get older, you become a little more critical in the things you read. When I read Porter when I was in my teenage years, I was just in awe of Porter and I thought her writing was incredible, the style, the perfection, and everything. But I'm a little bit older now, so I'm look at things with a little more critical eye. And I thought Flowering Judas, when I read it last night, was just a great, great story up until the last paragraph. To me, that's where it just gets to be a little too, I don't know how to describe it, a little too much or goes to areas it doesn't need to go into. Maybe she already sort of made her point, but I know the whole thing of Flowering Judas has to be expanded upon if that's the symbol that the story revolves around. So there has to be more. But I thought I thought also gave it kind of there's a cinematic quality to a lot of Porter's stories, and particularly in Ship of Fools. and it sort of gave the story a cinematic quality I didn't feel that it really needed. Just my opinion. People probably won't like it, but I think it's a great story up until the end.
That's really interesting, Alan, because I mean, I have to say, Flowering Judas never was my favorite amongst her stories.
Okay.
It was very interesting to me because I think I told you my doctoral dissertation is called Katherine Anne Porter in Mexican Art.
Yes.
And what I found were so many, what I thought were references to or use of Mexican art in the story. So
Mm-hmm.
I found that very, very interesting. And so part of the reason why I think that that ending, the ending sequence is effective is it does call on that tradition of the skeletons, the calaveras in Mexican art. And
I
she,
see.
I
I
mean,
see.
it comes out of that. And I think, I do think she was using that in addition to what she was pulling from Gerontian and the allusions to, that
Mm-hmm.
literary thing. But it's funny because I had the opposite reaction because I actually read this story 3 times when I was preparing to meet with you.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I did. And actually, I came to appreciate that ending more
Okay.
than I ever did before. So it
Okay.
is kind of interesting. I know that we have different reactions to it. And of course, I mean, I don't know how many times I've read the story. I certainly have read it many times, and I'm sure you have too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Well, yeah, I read it last night just to kind of refresh my memory, but I hadn't really read the story beginning to end in many years.
uh-huh.
And it's interesting as you get older, like I said, you look at things more critically, and I just thought this is a little too much. Just reading it very quickly last night at the very end, I thought this is too much. But I will say, I think it's some of her best writing, and some of the best writing in American literature is in that story. I mean, the writing from beginning to end is outstanding. So
Oh,
I'm always appreciative of that. I guess it's just as far as the substance of the story, the meaning, the symbolism,
uh-huh.
it gets a little out of control.
Yeah.
So
Well, I mean,
just me, just my
yeah,
opinion.
well, all of us are, entitled to our own opinions, and we could get into a debate about it. But I mean, I agree with you. I mean, she is such a beautiful writer. I mean, I remember when I was spending all my time writing my dissertation and spent so much time with Catherine Ann, my own writing was so much better because it was like rubbing off on me.
Oh, really? Really?
Yeah, when I go back and read it, I thought, I actually was reading my dissertation on Flowering Judas today, and I thought,
Mhm.
oh, geez, this is actually pretty good.
So would you say your specialty, I believe you said this to me and we were
Mhm.
emailing back and forth, that your specialty is her Mexico stories? Those are the ones you're most interested in?
I was mainly interested in, I mean, I can tell you the story. Basically, I was looking for a topic for my dissertation, and we
Mhm.
had Katherine Anne Porter's papers at Maryland. So I basically marched into the library and I started with what we call series 2, her writings in the paper, and I turned every leaf in that series of her papers. I don't know how many thousands of papers or hundreds of thousands of pages.
Wow.
And what I couldn't get over the fact that what she did before she went to Mexico was, very pedestrian. But as soon as she got to Mexico and started writing stuff in Mexico, it's the voice of Katherine Anne Porter.
Hmm.
What was it? Mexico, and I think Tom Walsh says Mexico basically opened up her creativity.
Hmm.
And what happened is, of course, the first story in her canon that was published is Maria Concepcion, which is a
Hmm.
very unusual story. In fact, someone once told me that it was the first story that actually had an indigenous woman as its main character.
Really? Really?
Very interesting story. It is a very interesting story. But
Hmm.
anyway, so that's the reason why I said, so then I thought, is there any influence of Mexican art? Because she did become very much involved with Mexican artists. And so that's how it all got going. So that's what I started looking for, and that's how I interpreted the stories and blah, blah, blah. But I mean, I just fell in love with that whole thing and
Sure.
became fascinated with the fact that this woman, I mean, you probably, of course, if you've read the biographies, she was in New York City. She had gone to New York City after leaving Denver. And she met some Mexicans in New York, and they told her, oh, you should go to Mexico. This is a really great time to be in Mexico. And she did.
Hmm.
And, we know what ensued from that. And that's basically how she got, really writing the work and into, publishing things
Hmm.
from her experiences in Mexico. So yes, some repertorial, as we know, but
Uh-huh.
also the fiction.
Yeah, and I guess you'd asked me before we started how I sort of got into Porter, and
Yeah.
I guess I always thought from the first time, even though I didn't always understand what I was reading when I was very young, I just thought it was Anglo-Saxon prose in its purest and most beautiful form. But to allude to what you just said, I think it's better because it's infused with Mexican culture and even the rhythms of the Spanish language. That
Hmm.
makes it even better.
Hmm.
So to me, it's sort of the best of both. You get the best of both worlds, I guess is a way of saying it with
Yeah.
Porter. And
Yeah.
I always thought that. And when I read Maria Concepcion too, that's a perfect example of those two things together. Um,
Yeah.
so I just have one more question, going back to what we were talking about the appearance of the story in college textbooks and anthologies. Do you think this story, because a lot of times, stories novels don't stand the test of time. And I know that Ship of Fools has kind of fallen out of favor. I believe it's now considered largely a failure. But do you think Flowering Judas will stand the test of time? And is Porter saying something about civilization in this story that will always be important, always be relevant?
Yeah. Oh, I think so, for
Right.
sure. I mean, I think it's perfectly obvious that the story is one it's so interesting because it came out of a specific thing, but yet
Mm-hmm.
it's universal. I mean, clearly that idea of betrayal, of self-betrayal, betraying others, and that, and the jauntest view of the world, I mean, of men, I think that's something that you see as a theme throughout her work, and it's very clear. So because of that, I mean, it is universal. And I think because it is so creative and so interesting, I mean, I think people find it very interesting that it has that Flowering Judas thing as a symbol or uh,
Mm-hmm.
and she uses it so effectively. Just basically the title, then that tree in the patio, and then the scene at the end. I mean, in some ways it's beautifully constructed. So there
Sure.
are a lot of reasons why that story will last and be looked at that way. But yes, I mean, I think the view of mankind, which is kind of a view of the mankind, as you say, you pointed out Ship of Fools. I think you have that same, men are, they're well, I don't want to use the word evil, but they are frail, and they do terrible things to each other. And that is clearly something that's going on in Flowering Judas. And none of us, not one of us, Laura, myself, are, we all have this characteristic. And because of that, it is universal. So
All right. Well, this has been
I
a
mean, I sort of grasped for it, but I don't know that I really answered it, right?
no, this has been a fascinating discussion. I think you've illuminated this story and what it's based on, and the theme and the symbolism for everybody. I think I'm up to 11 subscribers now, so hopefully at least 11 people will tune in and watch this watch this interview. I know Darlene will. I've already told her. I'm going to tell her as soon as it's posted. I'll let you know as soon as I post this as well. But just wanted to say thank you. Thank you very much again for taking the time to take part in my fledgling channel, which is doing a lot better than I thought it would, and getting a lot more attention than I ever thought it would, especially from the Katherine Anne Porter Society. So I'm very grateful, and maybe we'll do this again sometime. And I'll definitely see you in the conference in May in Boston, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm actually I decided that I had always been interested about the relationship between Catherine Anne and her French translator because they were
Mm-hmm.
such dear friends. So I'm going to do something on that. I've been looking at the letters that they exchanged, and they are really fascinating. So anyway, I'm looking forward to sharing that all with you, and of course seeing you in Boston, and talking about the channel. And I know that the other members of the Katherine Anne Porter Society will definitely be tuning in. It
That's
is.
good to hear. And I look forward to your presentation. And then Darlene's giving a presentation on what is her presentation
Hers
again?
is going to be on what she thinks are future channels. What I'm grasping for a word. Uh, Future opportunities for research on Katherine Anne.
I see. I see.
Areas that have not been touched that she thinks might be fruitful for people to pursue. So that's what I believe her presentation is going to be.
Well, we'll look forward to that. I hope I really feel like I'm out of my league, but hopefully I can come up with something that will keep people's interest for. Is each presentation supposed to last 20 minutes or so? Is that
Yeah,
they give you
basically
20 minutes and no more?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have to say that we often have people who go over, but it's really, I mean, you probably know yourself, 20 minutes is about as much as you can sit to listen.
But yeah.
And
Yeah.
so then of course we have the opportunity, if we only have three presentations that are 20 minutes long, then we do have the opportunity to have questions at the end.
Okay.
That's the reason why we try to keep it to 20. Anyway.
Well, I
So,
can't wait to see your presentation and Darlene's. I can't wait to hobnob with some people at the conference, and we will. And thank you once again for doing this, and we'll see you then.
all
Okay.
right. Great. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you. Bye
It's been
bye.
fun. Bye now.